anything in the amendment that's contained within the bill?
Let's deal with that after.
263. Yeah.
We'll now call to order the committee of conference on Senate Bill 14.
Good afternoon, Senator Abbas, Representative Roy, representing the House. I am the chairman of the Criminal Justice Committee and representative from Rockingham 31. To my right is Representative Rhodes and Representative Verville.
All right. Myself and Senator Reardon are here. Senator Darrell Abbas, District 22. All right. So just for clarification purposes on what we're going to discuss today. SB14, I think there was another Senate bill that involved mandatory sentencing with fentanyl. Was it SB13? 15.
14 and 15.
Close, but so 14 and 15. And what those two bills did, as passed in the Senate, the first part was it had to do with possession with intent to distribute. It made it a mandatory sentence if you were in possession of 20 grams or more. It was a mandatory sentence of 3.5 years in prison.
And that's higher than the original version.
Well, there's also a provision in there that if you're possessing 50 grams or more with the intent to distribute, which, keep in mind, 20 grams is about, I want to say 10,000 lethal doses of fentanyl. So we're talking about a large amount of fentanyl here. That would be a 7-year sentence if it's 50 grams or more. In addition, another bill that we had, it would create a mandatory sentence if you were to cause death someone, if you provided them fentanyl and they died, which I think we can say is a foreseeable consequence of doing that. The original version passed in the Senate would call for a mandatory sentence of 10 years in prison. I think for the purposes of today, we would reduce that to a mandatory sentence of 5 years. Mm-hmm. And in respect to the other topic that gets all the controversy, the psilocybin, I just call it, say mushrooms, but psilocybin. Now, just for clarification, nothing in this is a decriminalization. All right, it's still an arrestable offense.
Still subject to several years in prison.
Yes, and what for a first offense only, this is what's for consideration. A first offense, not your second or third or subsequent. If you're dealing with possession of 3/4 ounce or less, it would be a misdemeanor, unclassified misdemeanor. And just so everyone understands what that means is the prosecutor has a discretion to charge it as a Class A or a Class B misdemeanor. All right, there's still, so you're getting arrested, it's not decriminalized. Now, the difference between the two, a Class B misdemeanor does not carry a sentence of jail time. I would not support this if it was a Class B misdemeanor. When you're dealing with possession cases, really, if you're going to ever enter any type of plea, a lot of times it's in lieu of jail time. If there's no threat of jail time, I don't see many of these going forward
with a plea
being prosecuted. So it's still a misdemeanor. Any subsequent offense after the first will still be a felony offense, as the law is today. Right. This doesn't apply to distribution. Any selling it is still going to be just as harsh of a penalty.
Mm-hmm. So we agree.
Yeah. And that's what this policy does. Is there any questions that anyone has?
So the changes you're proposing with your amendment to the underlying bill are, you're bringing it back to the original version from the Senate, except for you've lowered the penalty for death resulting from 10 to 5. Otherwise, it's identical.
It's as passed by the Senate. The only change is the mandatory sentence for the cause of death is 5 years versus 10 years.
What's the term for the 20 grams? I just want to be sure, because my understanding was we were going to try to target a 3.5 year minimum for 20 grams.
Yeah, and 5 years for, or 7 years, excuse me, for 50 grams.
So if you have between 20 grams and 49.999, you would fall under the mandatory sentence of 3.5 years. If you're over that, reached the point of 50 grams or higher, the mandatory sentence is 7 years.
7 years, correct. Okay. Yep.
And
Yep.
that is a lot of fentanyl. I mean, that is enough to kill this entire building.
So to be clear, my understanding is 20 grams of fentanyl is enough to kill roughly 10,000 people, maybe as many as 20,000 people, right? It's a very large quantity of a very dangerous drug. The other thing I would point out is that we are not decriminalizing anything. On the psilocybin side, all we are doing is some penalty reform for a first offense. And I think it's really important to take note that psilocybin is essentially non-toxic. The average person would have to eat over 20 pounds of mushrooms to consume enough to kill themselves, right? The other thing is psilocybin is not habit forming, right? It is not addictive. And in fact, because it works on serotonin receptors, if you try to use it in a frequent cycle, it simply has no effect because the serotonin receptors stay saturated. So it's a completely different type of compound as opposed to opioids and narcotics. When we talk about fentanyl, we're talking about highly addictive substances that are potentially very, very deadly.
So not only that are manufactured in foreign countries that are actually being imported here for the sole purpose of poisoning our citizens. So if I may, for the House, so the version passed by the House obviously was much different. It included a safety valve that would have allowed some judicial discretion. The House felt that was necessary because the bill as is removes it totally. However, that being said, we understand the Senate's position and we're willing to accede to that in consideration of the decriminalization. We think that we can get that across the board.
Just for clarification purposes,
Excuse me, not decriminalization.
you eat 20 pounds of anything, you're probably going to have some problems, right? I'm not saying that this is a compromise between the two chambers.
Yeah.
Great,
And I think right now the biggest drug problem the state is facing is fentanyl.
for sure.
Times change. I think it's important we adapt along with it. Right? That's where people are dying. With psilocybin, you may say you can't physically overdose, at least within reason, you can't. Doesn't mean that it's something people should use.
Oh,
It
for
can
sure.
be dangerous. But fentanyl, people are overdosing at a high rate. Yeah, the deaths are down. We can thank our first responders and our EMTs for really stepping up with that. It doesn't mean that this problem has gone away. It's still there.
It's important to note that our first responders and law enforcement can overdose just by touching it. You don't have to take it. If you just touch it. So this is extremely lethal, and that's why we are taking.
So I agree with the chairman 100%. This is probably hands down the most serious drug issue facing the state of New Hampshire today. And I agree that stronger actions have to be taken with respect to fentanyl. There's no doubt about it. And that's why I support the language that we've discussed this afternoon 100%.
Any further discussion?
No, we're ready to take a vote over here if you're ready. Everyone here, Representative Beverly, are you in favor of, as we've discussed?
Yes.
Representative Rhodes?
Yes.
And I too. So the House accedes to the position of the Senate regarding the minimum mandatories. And I take it the Senate accedes to the House on the mushrooms.
Agreed.
We have an accord.
I think. And for the record, Senator Reardon will be replaced. I'm sorry you can't join us.
I'm good, thanks.
I think that concludes the hearing.